I'd just turned 50 years old, and I had a curse to break. Perhaps the word curse is a little bit overly dramatic, but at the time, it certainly felt like one. Despite fly fishing on a fairly regular basis, I hadn't caught a trout in nearly 2 years. For a fly fisherman, that's an eternity. I've had some moderate success with a fly rod in the past, and I've landed my share of fairly big fish. One of my favourite memories is of my young son's face when I brought a 5-pound rainbow trout home from a local lake. That same son is now nearly 15 years of age, and though I've tried to get him interested, I've had to reconcile the fact that fly fishing is just not his thing. I'm a little bit suspicious that when I stopped taking him on my trips, he actually felt a sense of relief. Maybe if I was a better fly fisherman, I could have made it more interesting for him. What was I doing wrong? There had to be more to this run of bad luck than, well, bad luck. We've all heard the old saying that catching a fish is of secondary importance to the experience of fishing. But somewhere along the line I'd begun to realise that I didn't care too much about the romantic notions of the sport, and just how much catching the occasional trout meant to me. I was determined to find a reason for the curse and banish it forever. These days, fly fishing has become my escape. I suppose that on some level it's my form of Zen meditation. Casting a fly to a trout, there is no greater exercise in being in the moment. Only skill, insight, and patience is truly rewarded. In moments like these, there's no room in my mind for past or future, just that moment of presentation, when a tiny scrap of feather disguising a hook and imitating an insect is offered from a safe distance to a fish whose world is concentrated simultaneously on two things, on its own safety and on its need to eat. Perhaps mindfulness itself was the key to breaking this curse and unlocking my full potential as a fly fisherman. Like a Zen Buddhist monk, I needed to reach down deep within myself. I needed to embrace my failings, my inadequacies, so that I could move forward and take my fishing to the next level. What an exhausting concept. When it came to recognising my faults, my failings, my inadequacies as a fly fisherman, in truth I didn't have to look very far. Even though I've been doing this for about 30 years, I'm definitely no master. I'd like to see myself as a journeyman, but in reality, on many levels, I'm still an amateur. My casting is often impulsive, it's a little bit hurried, and I spend a lot of time dealing with what I call vexatious botanical interference. In other words, untangling my fly line and my leader from just about every plant you could possibly imagine that grows around waterways. When it comes to producing tailing loops when I'm casting and the resulting wind knots and tangles, then, without a doubt, I am a master. If I possibly could, I'd spend all my time fishing. But the reality is, there are other demands on my life. This includes training birds of prey, like Asterix the peregrine falcon, for the environmental education business that we set up 7 years ago. During the flying season, he needs to be taken out for exercise every day possible. This work is incredibly rewarding and enjoyable, but the responsibility does keep me close to home, and it makes travel difficult. Our local waterways in the Central Highlands and Western Victoria have become my main haunts for fly fishing. Basically anything within 100 kilometres is fair game. These waterways might be tame compared to the wild places where many people with a liberal lifestyle and budget can fish, but there's certainly beauty and isolation to be found here at times. Our local stream goes by various names. In its headwaters, the Yarrawee River. Further downstream, the Lee. It's much overlooked, it's wild in places, and some of the lower reaches are hard to access without a four-wheel drive. A 62-year-old Land Rover that I call Lola is my choice of vehicle for access here, when she's up to the task. The river is more inaccessible than remote. It's home to a sparse population of wild-spawned brown trout that have never seen a hatchery. Some seasons I've fished here with great success. Other years, particularly recently, I've hardly seen a trout, and those that I have spotted here have been small, easily spooked and secretive. Larger fish, of perhaps a pound or two, are quite few and far between in my experience. They're denizens of shady riffles underneath tangled thickets of willows, to which they can retreat at the merest hint of any threat. Where humans gather around waterways, destruction and environmental problems are never far away. The river is polluted with phosphates and litter, particularly in its upper reaches. Fly fishing is hard here. To be honest, I usually have no hope. Many stretches of stream that hold fish are strangled with gorse and blackberry. Its banks are often strewn with rocks and hidden rabbit holes shrouded with weeds, bushes, and enormous hemlock umbels taller than I am. The water's very murky today. Kind of looks like soup. Pea and ham soup. Maybe it's actually Ararat sewage soup. Fly fishermen with more knowledge and skill than me, which isn't that hard, tell me that it fishes best after flood years, following a good flush of the system. In a hard year, the river feels like an overwhelming challenge, well above my pay grade and skill level as a fly fisherman. Even if you can find a trout that you're able to cast to, more often than not, they seem to drift derisively past your fly. I don't know why, but midwinter always seems to get me thinking about fly fishing. The close confines of our snug cottage make me edgy. The rivers are closed for the spawning season, and I start to dream of the solitude of big landscapes and smelting trout. In the evenings I tie flies and dream of big fish eating them. When I do get out, the reality is often far different from the dream. I drag wet flies and streamers through countless casts at bleak lakes. On several trips I fish from a kayak in Lake Wendouree, a place renowned for holding big trout right in the middle of Ballarat. But the flies I've used with great success in the past are now letting me down. The lake appears almost fishless. Is it my technique that's the problem? Am I retrieving too fast or too slow? Are my flies wrong? Rather fish simply laying low due to the cold water temperatures. Something just isn't quite right. I know these waters hold good trout stocks, but I seem to be coming up empty-handed every time. As the end of winter approached and spring loomed, I began to think about how many kilometres of water I'd actually dragged my fly line through, and how by random chance I should have accidentally foul-hooked a fish by the tail by now. I also began to wonder, was I missing something? Maybe it was my fly line itself that was to blame. I became nervous that it was a little bit too elastic and that I was missing takes by fish without even realising it. At this point, I have a confession to make. I've never spent decent money on fly line. In fact, if I'm honest, I've always bought the cheapest brand I could possibly lay my hands on. But all of that is about to change. There we are. Rio. In touch, trout, fresh water. Hopefully this will be a good line. And Rio are not paying me to endorse their products, but they can if they want to. Ooh, it's got a lovely fish on the front. Look at that. Beautiful brown trout. Look at all those wonderful spots. Ooh, that's the fish I'm going to catch. Hopefully, if I can break this curse. Having upgraded all of my fly lines in this manner, I immediately feel like my casting has improved, and I feel more in touch with my line and with my flies. I can't believe that I haven't made this investment years ago. On a trip to a local reservoir, I'm finally rewarded with a definite hit from a fish. Oh, bugger. Jeez, that was a hit. It was the first sign that I'd had that my fortunes were about to change. Little did I know, there was more to follow. Spring, stormy and sultry, begins to gather momentum, and as the weather begins to warm, I begin to cast with a little more optimism. I have a feeling that the trout are not far away, tantalisingly just beyond my perceptions in the riffles. The signs are all there for a good fishing season. I notice that after their long winter stasis that more and more insects are beginning to emerge. October arrives and a long-anticipated event commences. An old friend with a complicated sounding name, Atalophlebia australis, has returned. Mayflies are hatching. The nymph stage has spent up to 2 years on the lake bed, and now, as the spring sunlight gently warms the water, the nymphs metamorphosize into adults and a new terrestrial stage of their life cycle begins. What began as a trickle of mayfly duns emerging soon becomes a flood as the hatch gathers momentum. The adult mayfly will not live long. Their life expectancy ranges from a few minutes to a few days. Mayflies can't feed when they emerge as adults, as they have no functioning mouth parts, and their digestive system is filled with air. As fly fishermen very well know, many of them will have their brief adult life violently cut short. The first adult stage is the dun, or sub-imago. These teenagers soon shed again and become an imago or a spinner, which is the final stage of their short lives. Male spinners form a swarm just above the water, and females fly into the swarm to mate. After mating in flight, the female, who's sometimes called a spent spinner at this stage, falls onto the surface of the water and lays her eggs. She's quite likely to be eaten by a passing fish as she lies on the water. It's a sudden and very inglorious end to a brief life. The mayflies belong to an order of insects which are known as the Ephemeroptera, and they are indeed ephemeral, a fleeting visitor to the waterways, as quickly fading and as elusive as clouds. Finally, thanks to this abundance of insect life, the trout begin to overcome their apparent shyness. Over many days, and on trips to various different locations, some close calls follow, and believe it or not, I even hook a few trout. A week or so later, on a day of patchy cloud, no different to any other that preceded it, I suddenly meet with unexpected success. What seemed to be a small trout is rising sporadically at duns in a deeper section of water near the bank. After a gentle take, the trout and I are equally amazed and surprised to find ourselves solidly connected by a fly line. She's no monster, perhaps a pound or a pound and a half, but she's a beautifully marked little brown trout, and I'm deeply grateful to her for eating my fly. As I release her back into the depths, I'm filled with a sense that my curse has finally been broken. On a subsequent trip to the same location a few days later, the fishing is very challenging. There's no sign of any rising trout, and the mayflies are few and far between. But as if fate is on my side, a chance encounter saves the day. I'm happily filming myself fishing, little realising that somebody is actually filming me filming myself fishing. It was the first time I was to meet Tom Jarman, an expert fly fisher who also makes his own videos about fishing.
Okay, before you leave, grab this, that's what they ate.
Okay.
So when you see this video, when this video goes up on YouTube, you'll see the proof in when it comes out.
Like a mini sort of...
It's a mini damsel-y sort of thing. Yeah.
Which I've been tying some of your orange-headed damsels, so they're a bit bigger than this.
Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, that is just, the body is just, if you could buy olive hare's ear or spiky squirrel dubbing, and you just dub it and then get some Velcro and brush it, and it comes out like that. It's really easy. So
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
That and try and tie it.
It's super, yeah, it's so quick. It's so good. So a little bit of green flash in that, and then...
That small act of generosity, the gift of a fly, made a huge difference to my day. It was soon engulfed by a sizable brown trout. Yeah, it's not a monster, but it's feisty. With the breaking of the curse, the floodgates have been opened, and more fish follow. Usually no more than one per trip, but after my run of bad luck, the mysterious change of fortune is very welcome. I soon find myself back at Lake Wendouree, fishing with a renewed sense of hope and optimism. I managed 2 small fish that day, a small rainbow trout and a little redfin or English perch. As both are undersized, I release them back to the lake to grow a bit bigger. Redfin are often considered to be a pest species because they breed prolifically in inland waterways. So when I catch a nice frying pan sized one at Newland Reservoir, for once, I don't practice catch and release, but I invite it home for dinner. I'm not the only one having luck at the lakes. I meet old friends by the water and I enjoy their success as much as my own. We're united by a common love for that unique inner peace that only quiet waterways and the meditative rhythm of a fly rod can offer. Not to mention the joy of possibly catching a trout or two. Spring is weakening. The days are getting longer, and I'm starting to feel the summer heat creeping up on us. I decide to head out to Tullaroop Reservoir for one last fishing trip before the season's turn. North of the Great Dividing Range, the landscape is beginning to dry out after a wet spring. When I arrive at the reservoir, I nearly lose hope altogether. The water levels are dropping, exposing thick beds of weed well beyond wading distance, all around the lake's margins. It ends up being a very long hike to find open water that's fishable. Even though there isn't another human being in sight, I definitely don't feel alone. Rabbits scatter before me as I walk. There are birds everywhere. And white-bellied sea eagles and wedge-tailed eagles battle it out for the domination of the skies over the reservoir. After hiking for an hour, I find a perfect spot where a hillside and the lake's edge meet. There's deep water right under my feet, and the conditions look absolutely perfect. Oh, yes! Yes! Oh! Yes! It was the biggest brown trout I had caught all year. But as it turns out, the reservoir hadn't quite finished with me yet. Oh yes! Whoa! Oops. You ready to come in? Oh, oh, you beautiful creature. It felt like the final chapter of my fishing season, and most definitely the final chapter on the curse. I can only hope that everything I've learnt about these incredible fish over the last 2 years will help to ensure that I'll never have to endure another fly fishing curse again, but that remains to be seen. If I go to the water, what is it that I'll find? Will you know what I am doing? Will you read what's on my mind? Will you lie in weedy riffles or the shadows of the pines? Will you know my troubled mind? If I drift in dancing currents and I search the secret lies in the snaggy sunken wreckage of a well of tangled strife, if I follow hidden echoes and swirls that pass me by, we know my troubled mind. There's a secret in your soul that only worthy ones can hold. a wisdom in the subtleties where deceptions can unfold, a path of gentle walking if I'm cunning by them bold. We know my troubled mind. The water is life to you, it's cool and deep and strong. It's cold in its comfort, drifting endlessly along, making waves and causing ripples. If I seek to do you wrong, we know my troubled mind. The cuckoo and the blackbird, they mock me in the dawn. My feathered herald's lyrics are derisive and forlorn. If you hear their voices calling from deep waters far beyond, we know my troubled mind. When the water rises, the trout will eat the ants, but when the water falls, the ant will get his chance. If I study time and season and nature's happenstance, we know my trouble.